The corridor was silent except for the echo of his boots on marble. Thomas Redford had stood guard at Kensington Palace for 7 years. He knew every sound, every creak, every whisper that traveled through the old walls. But tonight something was different. It was just past midnight when he heard it. Voices sharp, urgent, coming from behind the closed doors of the private wing. He shouldn't have been there. His post was near the east entrance, but a late shift change had moved him closer to the royal apartments. Closer than protocol usually allowed. Thomas stopped walking. His hand tightened around his radio. The voices grew louder. It was them, Prince William and Catherine. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. The couple the world admired. The ones who smiled for every camera. The ones who seemed perfect. But the voices behind that door were not perfect. They were raw, broken, angry. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He knew he should walk away. He knew the rules. Royal guards were trained to be invisible, to hear nothing, to see nothing, to protect, not to listen. But he couldn't move. You don't understand what this is doing to me. Catherine's voice cut through the silence like glass. William's response was quieter. Ma, but the frustration was clear. I'm trying, Kate. I'm trying every day, but it's never enough for you, is it? Thomas swallowed hard. His pulse quickened. This wasn't a small disagreement. This was something deeper, something real. He glanced down the hall, empty. No one else was near. No one else could hear this. Before we go further, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thomas took a step back, ready to leave. But then he heard something that made him freeze. A sound. Crash. Something hit the floor inside the room. Then silence. His training kicked in. He moved closer to the door, every instinct telling him to check if someone was hurt. But he stopped just short of knocking. Kate. William's voice was softer now, pleading. Kate, please. Don't do this. I can't keep pretending, she said. Her voice trembled. I can't keep smiling when I feel like I'm disappearing. Thomas felt a weight settle in his stomach. He had seen them just that morning, walking through the gardens, laughing, holding hands, the picture of a fairy tale. But fairy tales, he realized, were just stories people told to feel safe. What do you want me to do? William asked. His voice cracked. Tell me. I'll do anything. There was a long pause. Thomas held his breath. I want you to see me, Catherine whispered. Not the Duchess. Not the perfect wife. Just me. Thomas heard footsteps inside. Someone was pacing. The tension was so thick he could feel it through the door. He knew he had to leave. He knew this was too much. Too private. Too dangerous to know. But as he turned to walk away, he heard Catherine say something that stopped him cold. If this doesn't change, William, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Thomas's blood ran cold. He stood frozen in the dim hallway, his mind racing. What had he just heard? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do about it? Thomas walked quickly down the corridor, his heart pounding against his ribs. He couldn't unhear it. Catherine's words echoed in his mind like a warning bell. I don't know how much longer I can do this. He reached the main hallway and forced himself to breathe, to think, to focus. 7 years. 7 years of service without a single mistake. He had protected diplomats, stood watch during state dinners, escorted foreign dignitaries. He knew how to be professional, how to be silent. But this was different. By morning, Thomas tried to convince himself it was nothing. Just a bad night. A normal argument. Every couple fought, even royal ones. But when he saw them at breakfast, something inside him twisted. They were in the garden. Photographers lined the fence. Catherine wore a blue dress that caught the sunlight. William stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. They were smiling, waving. Perfect. Thomas watched from his post near the terrace. He studied their faces. Catherine's smile was bright, but her eyes looked tired, hollow, like she was performing. William leaned in and whispered something to her. She laughed. The cameras clicked like hungry birds, but Thomas saw what the cameras didn't. The way her shoulders stayed tight. The way William's jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking. He knew the truth now, and it made everything feel wrong that afternoon. Thomas was called into the head of security's office. Commander Hastings was a stern man with gray hair and sharp eyes. He'd been with the royal family for 30 years. He knew everything that happened inside these walls. Redford, Hastings said without looking up from his desk. You were stationed in the West Corridor last night. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Yes, sir. Anything unusual to report? The question hung in the air like a trap. Thomas knew the right answer. The safe answer. No, sir. Nothing unusual. Hastings looked up slowly. His eyes locked onto Thomas's. You're certain? Thomas held his gaze. Yes, sir. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Hastings nodded. Good, keep it that way. Thomas left the office with sweat on his palms. The message was clear. Whatever he had heard, it was meant to stay buried. But later that night, everything changed. Thomas was off duty, sitting in the guard's break room with a cup of tea. The television was on in the corner. A news program. Royal coverage. Always royal coverage. The anchor smiled as she spoke. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge continue to be the public's favorite royal couple. Sources close to the palace say their relationship is stronger than ever. Thomas stared at the screen. Stronger than ever? The lie felt like acid in his throat. Another guard, Marcus, walked into the room and sat down heavily. He was older, close to retirement. He'd seen more than most. You look troubled, mate, Marcus said. Thomas hesitated. Then, carefully, he asked, Have you ever heard things you weren't supposed to hear? Marcus glanced at the door, then back at Thomas. His expression darkened. Every guard has. That's the job. You hear it, you forget it. But what if it was something serious? Marcus leaned forward. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then you forget it even harder. You understand me? This family has survived centuries because people knew when to stay silent. You want to last here? You'll learn that lesson fast. Thomas nodded slowly, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. Catherine's voice played over and over in his mind. I can't keep pretending. He thought about his own life, his own choices. He'd joined the service because he believed in duty, in honor, in protecting something bigger than himself. But what did protection mean if it meant ignoring the truth? At 3 a.m, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Come to the South Garden Gate. Alone. 4 a.m. Thomas sat up, his pulse racing. Who was this? How did they get his number? He stared at the message, his mind spinning with possibilities, and then, against every instinct telling him not to, he got dressed and walked into the night. The South Garden was dark. Fog rolled across the grass like smoke. Thomas walked slowly toward the gate, his hand hovering near his radio. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound made him turn his head. He shouldn't be here. He knew that. But something pushed him forward. Curiosity. Or maybe something deeper. When he reached the gate, he saw a figure standing in the mist. A woman, tall, dressed in dark clothes. Her face was hidden by the hood of her coat. It came, she said quietly. Thomas stopped a few feet away. Who are you? The woman pulled back her hood. Thomas's breath caught. It was Eleanor Chase, the Duchess's private secretary. He'd seen her dozens of times, always walking 2 steps behind Catherine, always holding a phone or a folder, always invisible, but now standing in the shadows, she looked different, desperate. Why did you bring me here? Thomas asked. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, checking the darkness. Because you heard them. Last night, I know you did. Thomas felt ice in his veins. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie, Eleanor said sharply. You were outside the private wing. You heard the argument. I saw you on the security feed. Thomas's mind raced. He'd been caught. His career was over. Maybe worse. I didn't hear anything, he said, his voice steady. And even if I did, it's not my place to talk about it. Eleanor stepped closer. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. She's breaking, Thomas. Catherine is breaking, and no one will help her. Thomas felt his defenses crack. What do you mean? Eleanor's voice trembled. You think last night was the first time? You think that was just one bad argument? She shook her head. It's been months. The pressure, the expectations, the constant cameras. She can't breathe without someone analyzing it. And William, he tries. But he's trapped too. They both are. Thomas wanted to walk away, to report this conversation, to do the right thing by the rules, but something in Eleanor's voice made him stay. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because someone needs to know the truth, Eleanor said. Someone outside the machine. Someone who isn't trying to protect the image. She pulled a small envelope from her coat and held it out. This is her journal. Catherine's. She asked me to keep it safe. She doesn't trust anyone else. Thomas stared at the envelope but didn't take it. Why give it to me? Because if something happens to her, someone needs to know what she was going through. Someone needs to tell the truth. Nothing's going to happen to her, Thomas said. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. Last week, she stood on the balcony for 20 minutes. Just stood there, looking down, and I thought... Her voice broke. I thought she might jump. Thomas felt the world tilt. Did you tell anyone? He asked. Who would I tell? Eleanor said bitterly. The palace. They'd bury it. The press. They'd twist it. William? He's drowning too. They're both drowning, and everyone is just watching them smile. Thomas looked at the envelope in her hand. He thought about Catherine's voice. I can't keep pretending. He thought about his duty, his honor, his silence, and then he took the envelope. Eleanor exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Thank you. Not promising anything, Thomas said. I need to understand. Eleanor nodded. That's all I'm asking. She pulled her hood back up and turned to leave. But then she stopped. Thomas, be careful. There are people who would do anything to keep this quiet. Anything. She disappeared into the fog. Thomas stood alone in the garden holding the envelope. His hands were shaking. He shouldn't read it. He knew that. It was private, personal, wrong. But he also knew that silence could be just as dangerous as truth. He walked back to his apartment, locked the door, and sat down at his small kitchen table. The envelope was sealed, plain white, no markings. He opened it slowly. Inside were pages, handwritten, dated, personal. He read the first entry. I don't recognize myself anymore. When I look in the mirror, I see someone I was told to be, not someone I am. I smile because I have to. I wave because that's the job. But inside, I'm screaming, and no one hears me. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He turned the page. William loves me. I know he does. But love isn't enough when the world wants a fairy tale and all I feel is emptiness. We argue now. About everything. About nothing. Because we're both so tired. So trapped. Thomas read entry after entry, each one more raw than the last, and then he reached the final page, the one that made his blood run cold. I've thought about leaving. Not just the palace, everything. Just disappearing. Starting over somewhere, no one knows my name. But I can't. The children. The duty, the promise I made. So instead, I stay. And every day, I lose a little more of myself. One day, there might be nothing left. Thomas closed the journal slowly. He sat in silence for a long time. And then he made a decision that would change everything. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, the journal in front of him, his mind racing with impossible choices. If he stayed silent, Catherine would keep suffering, keep pretending, keep losing herself piece by piece. But if he spoke, his career was over, maybe worse. Eleanor's warning echoed in his head. There are people who would do anything to keep this quiet. By morning, he'd made his choice. He couldn't go to the press. That would destroy Catherine's privacy completely. Turn her pain into headlines and speculation. He couldn't go to the palace leadership. They'd bury it, just like Eleanor said. Protect the image at all costs. There was only one person who might listen, who might actually care. William Thomas knew it was insane. A guard didn't just walk up to a prince and demand a private conversation. There were protocols, hierarchies, lines that couldn't be crossed. But Catherine's words haunted him. "I want you to see me." Maybe William needed to hear that from someone outside their golden cage. That afternoon, Thomas did something he'd never done before. He waited near the private study where William often spent time alone. He knew the Duke's schedule, knew when he'd be walking through that corridor. When William appeared, Thomas stepped forward. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear coiling in his chest. "I need to speak with you. Privately. It's urgent." William stopped, surprised. His security detail moved closer, but William raised a hand. "I know you," William said, studying Thomas's face. "You're one of the night guards." "Yes, sir." "Thomas Redford." William glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. This can't wait, sir." Something in Thomas's tone made William pause. He looked at Thomas carefully, then nodded to his security team. "Give us a moment." They stepped into a small side room. Just the two of them. William crossed his arms. "What's this about?" Thomas took a breath. This was it. No turning back. "Sir, I heard you and the Duchess 2 nights ago. In the private wing. I wasn't trying to listen, but I was nearby and I heard the argument." William's expression went cold. "You're admitting to eavesdropping on a private conversation?" "Yes, sir. And I know I should have walked away. But what I heard..." Thomas steadied himself. "Sir, your wife is struggling. Badly. And I think you might not realize how serious it is." William's jaw tightened. "You have no right to speak about my wife. Or my marriage." "I know, sir. But someone has to." Thomas pulled out the journal. He held it carefully, like it might shatter. "Her secretary gave this to me. Catherine's been writing down how she feels. What she's going through? Sir, she's in pain. Real pain. And she's hiding it from everyone." William stared at the journal. His face went pale. "Eleanor gave you that?" "She's worried, sir." "We both are." William reached for the journal, but his hand was shaking. He opened it slowly. His eyes moved across the first page. Thomas watched as William's expression changed. From anger to shock. From shock to something deeper, grief. William read page after page, his breathing growing heavier. When he reached the final entry, he closed the journal and pressed his hand to his face. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then William's voice came out broken. "I knew she was unhappy. I knew we were fighting more. But I thought it was just stress. Just a rough patch. It's more than that, sir." William looked up, his eyes red. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she just say how bad it was?" "Maybe she thought you couldn't hear her," Thomas said gently. "Maybe she thought you were too busy being the Duke to see her as Kate." William flinched like he'd been hit. He walked to the window and stared out at the gardens. "I've spent my whole life preparing to be king, learning to put duty first. To sacrifice personal happiness for the crown? I thought Kate understood that. I thought she accepted it." "She did, sir. But accepting something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." William turned back to Thomas. His voice was raw. "What am I supposed to do? I can't change who I am. I can't walk away from my responsibilities." "You don't have to," Thomas said. "But maybe you can change how you see them. Maybe you can remember that your wife's well-being is part of your duty too." William closed his eyes. "If this gets out, if anyone knows she's been feeling this way, it won't get out from me, sir. That's not why I came to you. Then why did you..." Thomas met his gaze. "Because I've spent 7 years watching people protect the image of this family. But I think maybe it's time someone protected the people inside it." William looked at the journal in his hands. "I need to talk to her." "Yes, sir." "You do." William walked toward the door, then stopped. He turned back to Thomas. "If I find out you've told anyone about this, ... You won't, sir? I give you my word." William studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Redford." He left the room, the journal held tightly in his hand. Thomas stood alone, his heart pounding. He'd done it. He'd crossed every line, broken every rule, but he'd told the truth. Now he could only hope it would be enough. The palace felt different that night. Thomas returned to his post, but the air seemed heavier, charged, like a storm was building behind. Closed doors, he didn't see William or Catherine for the rest of the day. No public appearances. No scheduled events. The royal calendar had been quietly cleared. Marcus found Thomas during the evening shift change. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus said. Thomas forced a smile. "Just tired." Marcus didn't look convinced. "Word is the Duke canceled his meetings today." All of them. Just locked himself in the private wing with the Duchess. No staff allowed in. Thomas kept his expression neutral. Maybe they needed some time together. "Maybe," Marcus said slowly. "Or maybe something happened that we're not supposed to know about." He gave Thomas a long look, then walked away. Thomas felt the weight of what he'd done pressing down on him. He'd interfered. Crossed boundaries that existed for a reason. He might have helped. Or he might have made everything worse. He wouldn't know until morning that night. Thomas was stationed near the private gardens. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of night where nothing happened until he saw them. William and Catherine. Walking together through the garden paths. They weren't supposed to be outside. Not without security. Not without notice. Thomas stayed back, hidden in the shadows. He knew he should call it in. Report their location. But something made him wait. They walked slowly, not touching at first. Just side by side, then Catherine stopped. She turned to William, and even from a distance, Thomas could see she was crying. William reached for her hand. She pulled back slightly, then let him take it. They stood there for a long time, not speaking. Just holding hands in the darkness. Then William pulled her into his arms, and Catherine collapsed against him. Her shoulders shook. He held her tighter. Thomas looked away. This moment wasn't his to watch. He moved back to his post, giving them privacy, when they finally returned to the palace. 20 minutes later, they were walking closer. Catherine's head rested against William's shoulder. Thomas pretended not to see them pass. The next morning, Thomas was called into Commander Hastings's office again. His stomach dropped. This was it. Someone had found out. He was finished. Hastings was sitting at his desk, his expression unreadable. "Redford," he said. "Sit down." Thomas sat. He kept his back straight. His hands steady, Hastings leaned back in his chair. "The Duke of Cambridge requested a meeting with me this morning. Very unusual. He had some interesting things to say." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Sir Hastings held up a hand. "He told me about your conversation yesterday. About the journal. About what you heard." Thomas's blood went cold. "Sir, I can explain," he also said. Hastings continued, "that you may have saved his marriage." Thomas stopped. "What?" Hastings's stern expression softened slightly. The Duke was grateful. "Said you showed courage and discretion. He asked that you be assigned to the family's personal security detail permanently." Thomas couldn't speak. He'd expected to be fired, arrested, banished. Instead, he was being promoted. "I don't understand," Thomas said quietly. Hastings leaned forward. "Between you and me, Redford, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've watched this family through good times and bad, and one thing I've learned is that sometimes the most important part of protecting someone isn't stopping the threat from outside. It's recognizing the threat from within." He paused. "You saw something was wrong, and you did something about it. That takes guts. It also takes judgment. The Duke trusts you. That means something." Thomas felt overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir." Hastings nodded. "But let me be clear. What you did was dangerous. You crossed lines that exist for good reasons. You got lucky that it ended well? Don't make a habit of it. No, sir. I won't. Good. Dismissed. Thomas stood and turned to leave. Redford, Hastings called after him. Thomas stopped. How is she? The Duchess. How did she seem? Thomas thought about Catherine in the garden, crying, but not alone. Better, sir, Thomas said. I think she's going to be better. Hastings nodded slowly. Good. That's good. Over the next few weeks, Thomas watched from his new post as things slowly changed. William's schedule lightened. More family time appeared on the calendar. Fewer public engagements. Catherine started painting again. Thomas would see her in the morning sometimes, standing in the garden with a canvas, her face peaceful. They walked together more, talked more, touched more. It wasn't perfect. They still argued sometimes. Still had bad days, but they seemed more present, more real. One afternoon, Catherine was walking through the corridor with Eleanor. She saw Thomas at his post and stopped. Mr. Redford, she said softly. Thomas stood straighter. Your Royal Highness? She smiled. A real smile. Not the practiced one for cameras. I wanted to thank you. Thomas kept his expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am. Catherine glanced at Eleanor, then back at Thomas. I think you do. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. William told me what you did. How you came to him. How you gave him my journal. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Ma'am, I hope I didn't overstep. You saved me, Catherine said simply. I was drowning and everyone was pretending I was fine. But you didn't pretend. You told the truth. Even when it was dangerous, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you for seeing me. Not the Duchess. Just me. Thomas felt emotion rise in his throat. It was my honor, ma'am. Catherine nodded. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and squeezed his hand. Just for a second. Just enough to say what words couldn't. Then she walked away. Eleanor following quietly behind her. Thomas stood at his post, his hands still warm from her touch. He thought about duty, about honor, about the weight of silence, and he realized that sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't follow the rules. It was knowing when to break them. 6 months passed. Thomas had settled into his new role on the family's personal security detail. He was no longer just a guard watching from the shadows. He was part of the inner circle, trusted, respected, but he never forgot that night in the corridor. The sound of Catherine's breaking voice, the weight of the journal in his hands. Some things you carried forever. It was early spring when everything came full circle. Thomas was stationed outside a private sitting room where William and Catherine were meeting with palace advisors. A charity event was being planned. Something about mental health awareness. When the meeting ended, the advisors filed out. Talking quietly among themselves, William and Catherine remained inside. Thomas could hear them through the partially open door. Their voices were calm, comfortable. Do you remember what you said that night? Catherine asked. When we had that awful fight? Which part? William said with a slight laugh. I said a lot of stupid things. You said you'd do anything to make it right. There was a pause. I meant it. Hey, I know you did, Catherine said softly. And you have. We've both worked so hard. Together, I wanted you to know I see it. I see you trying. I see us trying. We're not perfect, William said. No, but we're honest now. That's better than perfect. Thomas heard movement. Footsteps. He stepped back from the door, giving them space. When they emerged, William had his arm around Catherine's waist. She was leaning into him, relaxed in a way she hadn't been before. They saw Thomas and stopped. Mr. Redford, William said, walk with us for a moment. Thomas fell into step beside them as they moved through the corridor toward the gardens. We wanted you to hear something first, William said. Before it's announced publicly, Catherine took over. We're launching a new initiative for mental health, specifically focused on the pressures of public life. The isolation, The expectations. Thomas listened carefully. "We're going to share our story," William continued. "Not all of it, but enough. We want people to know that even in the palace, behind all the privilege and protocol, we're still human. We still struggle." Catherine's voice was steady. "I'm going to talk about my experience, about feeling lost, about the darkness, because I think there are people out there who feel the same way. And maybe if they hear that someone like me went through it, they'll know they're not alone." Thomas felt emotion rise in his chest. "That's incredibly brave, ma'am." "It's terrifying," Catherine admitted. "But it's also necessary. I spent so long hiding, pretending. It almost destroyed me. I don't want anyone else to feel like they have to do that." William looked at Thomas. "This wouldn't be happening without you. You know that, right?" Thomas shook his head. "You both did the hard work. I just opened a door." "The right door," Catherine said. "At the right time." They reached the garden, the same one where Thomas had watched them reconcile that night. Catherine looked out at the flowers. "I used to hate this place. It felt like a beautiful prison. But now," she smiled, "now I see it differently. It's still a palace. Still a cage in some ways. But at least I'm not alone in it anymore." William squeezed her hand. They stood together in comfortable silence. Then Catherine turned to Thomas. "Can I ask you something? That night, when you heard us fighting, what made you decide to do something about it?" Thomas thought carefully. I realized that protection isn't just about standing guard. It's about caring. Really caring. Not just about the title or the crown. About the person." Catherine's eyes shimmered. "The world could use more people like you." "The world has plenty of good people," Thomas said. "They just need permission to be honest." William nodded slowly. "We're going to try to create that permission. In our own small way." A few weeks later, the announcement was made. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were launching the Heads Together initiative, a mental health campaign. With a twist, they were sharing their own experiences, not in sensational detail, but with raw honesty. Catherine spoke at the launch event. Thomas watched from the side of the stage. "For years I smiled when I was supposed to smile," she said to the crowd. "I appeared strong when I was supposed to be strong, but inside, I was struggling. And I thought that admitting it would be weakness, that asking for help would be failure." The audience was silent, captivated. "I was wrong," Catherine continued. "The strongest thing I ever did was tell the truth. To my husband, to myself, and now to all of you. Mental health struggles don't discriminate. They don't care about your title or your privilege, and suffering in silence only makes them worse." William stood beside her, his hand on her back, supporting her. "We're here today to say, it's okay to not be okay," Catherine said. "It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be honest about your pain, because that's not weakness. That's courage." The crowd erupted in applause. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. That evening, Thomas was finishing his shift when Eleanor found him. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Eleanor said, watching Catherine through a window as she laughed with staff members. "She is," Thomas agreed. Eleanor turned to him. "I never thanked you properly." "For what you did? For taking that risk?" "You trusted me," Thomas said. "That was its own kind of risk." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I didn't know what else to do. I was so scared for her." "We all were. She's stronger than anyone gave her credit for." "She always was. She just needed someone to believe it." Eleanor walked away, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. He looked out at the palace, at the gardens, at the life he'd chosen. He thought about duty, about honor, about the rules he'd broken and the ones he'd kept, and he realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply listen. Really listen. Not to the role someone played, but to the person they were. Catherine had needed someone to hear her, not as a duchess, not as a symbol, but as Kate, and in that moment, Thomas had chosen to be that person. Years later, Thomas would look back on that night in the corridor. The night he heard two people struggling behind a closed door, and he would know with certainty that he'd made the right choice, not because it was easy, not because it followed protocol, but because sometimes saving someone meant risking everything. And that, Thomas understood, is what true protection really meant. The palace still stood. The crown still glittered. The fairy tale continued. But inside those walls, two people were finally free to be human, and that made all the difference.